Beer is the only substance millions of people consume regularly without ever asking a serious question about what it's doing to them. Not once. People scrutinize food labels. They argue over sugar, oils, additives, and artificial colors. They track calories, protein, carbs. Yet when it comes to beer, all of that skepticism disappears. Beer gets a free pass. It's treated as harmless, cultural, traditional, almost immune from criticism. And that blind trust is exactly where the problem begins. Because beer today is not the beer humans drank hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Modern beer is an industrial product, engineered for scale, speed, consistency, and profit. And in that process, it has quietly transformed into something your biology was never designed to handle on a regular basis. Here's what most people don't realize. Beer isn't just alcohol. It's a complex chemical system. A mixture of ethanol, sugars, fermentation byproducts, stabilizers, processing agents, and residual compounds that interact with your liver, gut, brain, hormones, and sleep every single time you drink it. And the damage doesn't show up the way people expect. You don't collapse. You don't get sick overnight. You don't feel an obvious warning. Instead, it shows up as subtle changes. Worse sleep, more fatigue, brain fog, unexplained anxiety, weight that creeps on even when nothing else changed, recovery that takes longer than it used to. And because none of it feels dramatic, beer never gets blamed. Science has a name for this pattern. It's called chronic low-grade physiological stress, damage that accumulates quietly, invisibly, over time. That's why this video matters. Because not all beers are equal. Some are far more damaging than others. Not because they're stronger, but because of how they're made, what survives fermentation, and how frequently people drink them without thinking twice. Tonight, we're breaking down 8 beers you should never drink again, not based on opinions, trends, or fear-mongering, but based on brewing science, toxicology, and long-term biological data. And stay with this video until the end. Because the last beer on this list is the one most people believe is safe, the one they drink casually, repeatedly, without guilt. And according to science, that assumption may be costing them more than they realize. Once you understand what's actually happening inside your body, you won't be able to unsee it. Let's begin. Point 1. Cheap high-adjunct lagers. Corn, rice, glucose-heavy industrial lagers. These are the beers most people drink without thinking. And that's exactly why they're dangerous. They're light. They're cheap. They go down easily. They don't feel aggressive. And because they don't hit hard in the moment, people assume they're safe in the long run. Science disagrees. Cheap adjunct lagers are engineered around one priority: efficiency. Not human efficiency, industrial efficiency. They replace malted barley with corn syrup, rice, or refined glucose because these ferment faster, cost less, and produce predictable alcohol levels at scale. But what's efficient for factories is hostile to human metabolism. Here's what actually happens inside your body when you drink one. The moment ethanol enters your bloodstream, your liver shifts into emergency mode. Alcohol is treated as a toxin because biologically it is. Fat burning stops. Detoxification becomes the top priority. At the exact same time, the refined carbohydrates from corn or rice flood your bloodstream. Blood sugar spikes rapidly. Insulin surges. Now you have a metabolic contradiction. Your body is trying to detox poison and manage a sugar load simultaneously. Science calls this metabolic interference. Glucose can't be used efficiently. Fat can't be burned. Storage becomes the default. Over time, this pattern promotes visceral fat accumulation, the kind that wraps around organs, even in people who aren't overeating and don't look overweight. Here's the hook most people never hear. You don't need to binge drink for this to happen. You just need to drink predictably. 2 beers after work. 4 nights a week. For years. That's enough. But metabolism is only part of the damage. Cheap adjunct fermentation creates higher levels of acetaldehyde, a toxic alcohol byproduct. Acetaldehyde is not just responsible for hangovers. It damages proteins, stresses mitochondria, inflames tissue, and directly harms DNA. Your body can neutralize small amounts, but repeated exposure overwhelms natural defenses. And because these beers are easy to drink, people consume them more often than stronger, harsher alcohols. That frequency is the real danger. This is why people often say, "I don't drink much, but I feel worse than I used to." It's not imagination. It's chemistry. Cheap adjunct lagers don't feel like poison. They feel like routine. And routine damage is the hardest to detect. Point 2. High-gravity malt liquor. Maximum alcohol, minimal biological compatibility. Malt liquor is often misunderstood as just strong beer. That misunderstanding is costly. Traditional beer works with yeast. Malt liquor pushes yeast beyond biological comfort to extract as much alcohol as possible from the cheapest ingredients available. When yeast are stressed, they don't just produce more ethanol, they produce fusel alcohols. Fusel alcohols are heavier, more toxic alcohols that your liver struggles to process efficiently. They linger longer in the body, amplify neurological stress, and increase cellular damage per unit consumed. This is why malt liquor hits differently. Not just stronger, dirtier. Research shows malt liquor consumption is associated with disproportionate increases in liver enzyme levels compared to standard beer at similar alcohol intake. Translation: your liver works harder for the same buzz. But the chemical damage is only half the story. The deeper issue is neurological conditioning. High-gravity beers deliver alcohol rapidly. Blood alcohol rises faster. Dopamine spikes sooner. The brain learns to associate speed of intoxication with reward. Science shows this pattern accelerates habit formation, even in people who don't consider themselves heavy drinkers. In other words, malt liquor doesn't just affect your liver. It trains your brain. Tolerance rises faster. Cravings strengthen. Just one becomes less satisfying. This is why malt liquor consumption often escalates quietly. Not because people want to drink more, but because their neurochemistry adapts. Here's the hook most people don't want to hear. Fast intoxication is not a feature. It's a neurological risk factor. The faster alcohol hits your brain, the faster your brain rewires around it. Malt liquor isn't just a stronger drink. It's a behavioral accelerant. And once that conditioning sets in, pulling back becomes harder than people expect, even without addiction. Your body doesn't negotiate with chemistry. Point number 3. Industrial wheat beers. Unfiltered, mass-produced wheat-based beers. Wheat beers have a reputation problem, not because they're bad, but because people assume they're harmless. They're often described as smooth, easy on the stomach, or lighter than other beers. And in small, traditionally brewed batches, that can be true. But industrial wheat beers are a different animal entirely. Wheat, as a grain, is biologically fragile. It absorbs moisture easily, stores poorly, and is highly susceptible to fungal growth during harvesting, transport, and storage. At industrial scale, avoiding contamination becomes nearly impossible. It can only be managed, not eliminated. When wheat is exposed to certain molds, those molds produce mycotoxins, chemically stable compounds designed to protect the fungus from predators. And here's the critical detail most people don't realize. Mycotoxins do not reliably disappear during brewing or fermentation. Unfiltered wheat beers retain suspended particles from the grain, and those particles are where mycotoxins concentrate. Now here's where the danger becomes subtle. Mycotoxins rarely cause immediate illness. Instead, they interfere quietly with biological systems, especially the nervous and endocrine systems. Research links chronic low-level exposure to symptoms that most people never associate with beer. Brain fog, low-grade anxiety, mood flattening, poor stress tolerance, immune suppression. This is why some people say things like, "That beer just doesn't sit right with me," without being able to explain why. They're not imagining it. Their nervous system is detecting chemical stress, not alcohol intoxication, but toxic interference. And because the effects are diffuse and delayed, the beer gets blamed last, if at all. Here's the hook most people miss. If a beer makes you feel mentally off rather than drunk, your body is telling you something important. Wheat beers don't need to be avoided universally, but industrial, unfiltered versions deserve skepticism. Your biology isn't fragile. It's observant. Point 4. Flavored beers and natural flavoring. Fruit, dessert, candy-style beers. This is where modern beer stops pretending to be traditional. Flavored beers are designed to bypass taste resistance. They're sweet, familiar, and engineered to appeal to people who don't even like beer. But the phrase natural flavoring is one of the most misleading labels in the entire food and beverage industry. Legally, it does not mean safe. It does not mean simple. It does not mean traditional. It means the flavor originated from a natural source, after chemical extraction, modification, stabilization, and recombination. These compounds are often processed using solvents, then bound to carriers that help them survive alcohol, heat, and storage. Now add alcohol to the equation. Alcohol increases intestinal permeability, often called leaky gut. It weakens the blood-brain barrier. It accelerates absorption of compounds that would otherwise pass through the body with minimal interaction. This creates a phenomenon known as synergistic toxicity. Two substances that are relatively mild on their own can become problematic together. This is why flavored beers disproportionately cause headaches that feel different from normal hangovers, sudden nausea, heightened anxiety, sleep disruption, heart-pounding sensations. Not because the drink is strong, but because the chemistry is complex. Here's the hook most people don't want to accept. If a beer tastes like fruit punch, candy, or dessert, and fermentation didn't create that flavor, your body is processing compounds it was never meant to handle alongside alcohol. Flavor isn't free. Sweetness isn't harmless. And novelty doesn't mean compatibility. These beers don't just bypass taste resistance. They bypass biological intuition. Your brain likes them. Your body doesn't. Point 5. Ultra-light, ultra-processed beers. Light, low-calorie, crystal-clear beers. Light beer is marketed as discipline in a bottle. Fewer calories, less heaviness, less guilt. But science doesn't measure guilt. It measures biological cost. To create ultra-light, crystal-clear beer, manufacturers aggressively strip out compounds that give beer body, color, and flavor. In that process, they also remove polyphenol and flavonoids, plant compounds that naturally buffer alcohol's oxidative stress. Those compounds matter. Polyphenol act as antioxidants. They slow alcohol absorption slightly and reduce cellular damage by neutralizing free radicals generated during ethanol metabolism. When you remove them, alcohol hits harder per unit consumed. This means two things happen at once. First, intoxication feels cleaner and faster, which encourages consumption. Second, oxidative stress increases because ethanol is now acting with fewer biological breaks. In other words, light beer doesn't reduce alcohol's impact. It removes alcohol's natural counterbalance. Here's the hook most people don't expect. A beer that feels lighter can actually be harder on your cells. The clarity isn't purity. It's absence of protection. Point 6. Clear glass bottles and light-struck beer. Beers exposed to light before you ever open them. If you've ever opened a beer and smelled something skunky, sharp, or off, that wasn't bad luck. That was chemistry. Clear glass allows ultraviolet light to penetrate the bottle. When light hits hop compounds, it triggers a photochemical reaction that creates sulfur-based molecules detectable at incredibly low concentrations. That skunky smell is one of the most sensitive chemical warning signals humans have, and it exists for a reason. Light-struck compounds increase nausea, headache frequency, and inflammatory response. They add to the detox burden your liver is already carrying from alcohol itself. What makes this worse is that light damage often happens before you buy the beer, during transport, storage, or display. Here's the hook most people ignore. If a beer smells wrong, your body already knows it's compromised. Drinking it anyway isn't powering through. It's overriding millions of years of sensory evolution. Your senses aren't dramatic. They're protective. Point 7. Extreme bitter, high IBU IPAs. Overhopped, double, triple, and imperial IPAs. Hops are not the villain. Excesses. Modern extreme IPAs are no longer about balance or preservation. They are engineered for sensory shock, maximum bitterness, maximum aroma, maximum impact. From a biological perspective, that matters. Hops stimulate histamine release. In moderate amounts, this is manageable. In excessive doses, histamine becomes a systemic irritant. High histamine loads are linked to sleep disruption, acid reflux, anxiety spikes, heart palpitations, inflammatory stress. This is why some people feel wired, restless, or anxious after drinking heavily hopped beers, even when they're not particularly drunk. And here's the key point most people miss. Sleep disruption is not a side effect. It's a cost. Alcohol already fragments sleep. Add high histamine response, and recovery quality collapses. You may fall asleep. You won't recover. Over time, poor sleep compounds insulin resistance, weakens immune repair, and accelerates neurological aging. Here's the hook that lands hard. If a beer regularly ruins your sleep, science says it's costing you far more than a hangover. Bitterness isn't strength. Balance is. Point 8. Old, oxidized, or poorly stored beer. Expired, heat-damaged, or light-exposed beer. This is the quietest danger on the list, and one of the most ignored. Beer is chemically unstable over time. When stored improperly or kept too long, ethanol and hop compounds oxidize into aldehydes and peroxides. These compounds damage proteins, lipids, and DNA. That wet cardboard taste people joke about, that's oxidative decay. Here's what makes this dangerous. You don't always taste mild oxidation, but your cells still experience it. Oxidized beer increases oxidative stress, the same biological process linked to aging, inflammation, and chronic disease. And because the beer doesn't taste terrible, people drink it anyway. Here's the hook most people never consider. A beer doesn't need to taste bad to be biologically compromised. Silent damage is still damage. Beer isn't evil, but some beers are dishonest. They look harmless. They feel familiar. They slide into routine without resistance. And routine is where long-term damage hides. Science doesn't care how relaxed a drink makes you feel. It cares about pathways, stress load, and cumulative exposure. Your liver doesn't see branding. Your gut doesn't care about nostalgia. Your brain responds to chemistry every time. And biology always collects the bill. So here's the real question. Now that you know what's actually happening inside your body, will you keep drinking the same beers anyway? Because once the mechanism is clear, ignorance is no longer an excuse. If this video made you rethink even one bottle in your fridge, it did its job. If you value content that cuts through marketing and tells you what the science actually says, support the channel. Like, share, and subscribe. And comment below. Which beer are you done drinking for good? And what finally changed your mind? Because comfort is easy. Truth is better.